Hello and good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the Essential Services Commission information session on the currently advertised transmission licence for the Powercor Australia application. I see a few people are still joining, but we'll start the process now. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are meeting on today, and for me, my name is Rachel Fry and I'm the Director of the Market Operations team in the Energy Division. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we are meeting on today, and for me that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands where you are today, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people here today. Before we begin, a couple of items about the running of the forum. The forum including the question and answer portion will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the website post the session. If you have any questions, we'll be using the Q&A function in Teams. So if you aren't familiar with the Q&A function, on the screen you can see where it is found. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation. I want to be particularly transparent about how we will conduct the Q&A session and what questions we can and those that we may not be able to answer today. My colleagues Maren and Ed will monitor the Q&A and read the questions out at the end. Firstly, where questions have been submitted prior to the session, we will address these in the content of the presentation. Today's presentation relates to the application and submission process for Powercor and their application for a transmission licence. This application is under assessment by the Commission, and as such we may not be able to answer all questions which relate to how this assessment occurs and anything that could preempt a decision. Some questions relating to Powercor's proposal may be better answered by the information provided by Powercor or raised through a submission. If this is the case, we will include a comment against any questions and let you know. Where there are questions relating to other matters, we may choose to answer these individually at another time. And finally, if we are unable to answer your question today, we will make sure these answers are provided at a later time. So with that, here's a brief overview of the topics we will be covering today. As you're aware, Powercor has applied for a licence under the Electricity Industry Act to transmit electricity. This application is under consideration and advertised for submissions. In today's forum, we will provide an overview of the Powercor application, talk through the Essential Services Commission role in electricity licensing, key parts of the licence assessment process, and what we can and can't consider as part of our decision-making process. We'll provide information on how to make a submission and what we do with the information provided in submissions. There'll be timeframes and next steps of that process. So Powercor has applied for a licence to transmit electricity under the Electricity Industry Act. When a company or person applies for a licence to transmit electricity, they provide information to the Commission on their proposed use of the licence, alongside information to demonstrate they can meet legislative decision-making criteria. Each application is assessed on its merits. In Powercor's application, it has asked for a licence that covers the same geographical area as its distribution licence. They explain their proposed use of the licence, which is to deliver transmission infrastructure to connect generation projects and large load customers to the distribution network. Further, Powercor anticipates the infrastructure would have a capacity of up to 220 kV. It is open to the Commission to include conditions on the licence to restrict it to a certain area or capacity. Powercor noted in its application that the purpose of the licence is to provide major businesses and renewable energy proponents more choice when it comes to connecting to the Victorian energy grid. Powercor added the licence will allow it to increase competition in the provision of transmission activities. For further information, we suggest reviewing the information on the Commission's website page Also, Powercor presented a webinar in May on their proposal, and this can be found on their website. We have received a question in relation to Powercor's application. Specifically, how can a transmission licence application be considered complete or even potentially granted if no infrastructure is identified? So since its introduction in 2000, the Electricity Industry Act has contemplated and practice necessitates that licences can be granted in advance, sometime in advance of the activity of transmitting electricity taking place or even the assets being known. The Act actually doesn't require a specific asset to be identified, but I note that applicants have chosen to do so previously. So prior to the grant of a licence, the Act requires the Commission to be satisfied of the applicant's technical capacity to transmit electricity in accordance with its licence conditions. The governance, skills, management and other capabilities to do this are not unique to a specific transmission asset and can be applied to different transmission assets. I'm now going to look at the Commission's role in energy regulation and how we assess transmission licence applications. These slides are to provide information on the assessment and decision-making criteria to grant a transmission licence, and we also hope this assists with the information and preparation for any submissions. The Commission was created under the Essential Services Commission Act, and we are the independent regulator for promoting the long-term interests of Victorian consumers with respect to the price, quality and reliability of essential services. In relation to electricity, we are responsible for licensing businesses involved in transmitting, distributing, generating, supplying and selling electricity in Victoria under the Electricity Industry Act, establishing and maintaining codes and guidelines, promoting and enforcing compliance with the codes, and reporting on the performance of energy businesses and on energy prices. A person who wants to engage in the activity of transmitting electricity in Victoria is required to hold a licence granted by the Essential Services Commission. This is one part of the regulatory framework in place to operate transmission assets in Victoria. There are also a number of other processes which are regulated by other bodies that may need to be considered before transmission can begin. I'm now going to briefly go through the considerations for granting a transmission licence. Under the legislative framework, including the Essential Services Commission Act and the Electricity Industry Act, the Commission will only grant a transmission licence where it is satisfied the applicant has the technical capacity to comply with the conditions of the licence, the applicant is a fit and proper person to hold a transmission licence, and it considers appropriate having regard to the Commission's statutory objectives. You can refer to our guideline on the Commission's website for more information. We'll look at these briefly in turn. So, technical capacity to meet its licence conditions. Our assessment includes, but is not limited to, reviewing the governance, risk and compliance systems and policies of the applicant, looking at the relevant agreements with other parties to undertake the proposed work in relation to the proposed assets or use of the licence, and the personnel available to the applicant. We note on some occasions the expertise or personnel is held with the parent company, and in these circumstances we require agreements between companies to show that the requisite technical capacity to comply with the licence conditions is available to the applicant. If granted, maintaining technical capacity is usually a standard condition for transmission licences. In considering the applicant's suitability or fit and proper person, we will consider the conduct of the applicant company, directors, office holders, and any person with significant managerial duties or influence over the applicant. We may also consider the conduct of related entities and also entities that can exert control over the applicant. Disclosure of one or more matters may not lead us to automatically conclude that the applicant is not fit and proper to hold a Victorian energy licence. But if a disclosure is made, we'll consider a number of factors to determine its influence. These include the seriousness of the matter, the remediation the applicant has put in place, and the applicant's subsequent conduct. We must also consider our statutory objectives under the Essential Services Commission Act and the Electricity Industry Act. There are a number of objectives, but just to name a few, these include efficiency in the industry and incentives for long-term investment, and the degree and scope for competition within the industry. Victoria has allowed competition to build electricity transmission infrastructure since 2012. In the 12 years since, 8 companies have secured electricity transmission licences, and a full list of these can be found on the Commission's website. We have also included a complete extract of the statutory objectives on the consultation page for the Powercor application. I've spoken about the technical capacity for an applicant to meet the licence conditions, and that it's also open for the Commission to include further conditions on a licence. Usually, a transmission licence is granted containing a range of standard conditions. These include notices, so address and process for issuing notices to licensees, grant of the licence, a description of the activities permitted by and the commencement date of the licence, change in control, so a requirement for the licensee to notify the Commission of any change of ownership of the licensee or change of parent company, compliance with regulatory instruments, including codes of practice and what compliance systems licensees will have in place to monitor any compliance issues or report potential non-compliance, and ongoing technical capacity, where the licensee must maintain ongoing technical capacity. There are also items in relation to general administration of the licence, including processes for revocation, variation and transfer of licensee. Outside of the standard licence conditions, it's open to the Commission to include special licence conditions that are particularly relevant to that licensee or asset. For example, limiting the scope to what the licensee has applied for or the applicant has applied for, addressing bespoke risks which are not covered by the standard conditions, i.e. they may be licensee specific. The Commission will also review standard conditions from time to time to ensure they remain fit for purpose. So a very important part of the assessment process is seeking feedback on the application as related to the assessment criteria. We are interested in your feedback to assist us in our assessment of Powercor's application. Submissions close on 11 June 2024, which is in a couple of weeks. As you can see on the slide, you can complete the survey or provide a submission via the Engage Victoria website. And unless you request otherwise, your name and your submission will generally be published on our website and made publicly available so others can see the information we are considering when making decisions. We will consider all submissions in relation to the assessment criteria, and they may also influence conditions, if any, placed on a licence. We welcome all submissions, but note we may not be able to provide individual responses on all the submissions that are considered through the process. As mentioned on the previous slide, to assist in making any submissions, we have provided survey questions on the Engage Victoria site. They are listed on the screen. You're welcome to answer all or some of these questions, but you're also welcome to include a document or submit a document rather than completing the survey. So what to expect next? So as I mentioned, submissions close at 5 p.m. on Tuesday, the 11th of June. Following this, we will consider all stakeholder feedback and assess the documentation from Powercor before putting forward a recommendation to the Commission for decision. We're expecting this process will take probably 2 to 3 months from the close of submissions. So that's our sort of overview of the process that we will go through and the Essential Services Commission role. So we can now move to the question and answer portion. If you do have any questions, please include them in the Q&A function.
Okay. We have one question. Thank you for answering the question about how can a license be granted without infrastructure having been identified. This seems to be counter to what a license fundamentally licenses in all situations. Extrapolating from that, could a potential generator apply for a general license in Victoria if no project is identified? why do they now only apply for a license per location? And they usually apply for that license as the development nears commissioning. Why has the EC not advised them that the legislation allows them to get a blanket license?
Thank you for the question. So today we're obviously talking about transmission license applications, and we're looking at the competition around transmission licenses. So as I said, in the transmission license sector, we are looking at licenses that we can people can apply for future projects. We won't be going into generation licenses today, but we can take that question away and speak to you individually.
I think we have a second question. So the second question is to confirm the overarching objective of the EC is to promote the long-term interest of Victorian consumers with respect to the price of essential services, and therefore consideration will be given to fair competition.
As mentioned, part of the statutory objectives for the Essential Service Commission is to consider the competition within the industry. So we would welcome any kind of submissions around the competition aspect, and I believe we have a question of that in our survey as well.
And just one second.
I've got another question. Do you use triple bottom line factors into consideration in consideration of environmental and social?
Thank you for the question. Just pulling out, so as part of the statutory objectives of the Commission, one is the relevant health, safety, environmental and social legislation applying to the industry. So that is a factor in the decision making, but as I said, there's a number of factors in the decision making process.
Third, next question. Is the EAC going to consider any potential harms to existing contestable markets or consumer choice?
Again, as we've mentioned, we'll consider decision-making criteria, including the statutory objectives for the decision. We would welcome any feedback or submissions on this point, but we're still in the assessment process at the moment.
Right. Next other question. 220 kV can go underground. Is this part of your review? It can be a license condition.
I think
that may be a question best answered by Powercor.
Yeah, at this point we will put that as a question best answered by Powercor and how they're going to possibly use the license. As part of our license conditions, we will consider the most appropriate for the application if granted.
And another.
This one.
Sorry. Yep.
Sorry. Can the ESC outline how it or other agency will manage the potential anti-competitive nature of a TNSP having the same geographic location as a DNSP for contestable, just getting the next part of the question, contestable projects? How is this managed for AusNet?
So as we were mentioning earlier, today we're here to talk about the Powercor application. We will consider the competition of the market as far as we are able to in part of our functions and in the application process. And we note that Powercor is also included in their documentation how they will look at the tender process. So that's how we will look at that one. I won't comment today on the AusNet question.
And we have a follow-up question on the transmission license. Where in the Electricity Industry Act or the Essential Services Commission legislation does it say the transmission license can be granted for unidentified infrastructure?
So under Section 19(4) of the Electricity Industry Act, it contemplates granting of licenses where a licensable activity is some years away from commencement.
Right. I don't think there's any further questions unless people.
There's
I
probably,
can't.
I was going to say, there's probably a couple of questions there that relate to sort of issues that don't relate, that are sort of fit sort of outside of exactly the Powercor application. So I'm happy we can take some of those on notice. I know the first one around generation licenses will provide an answer back to that one. If there are any further questions, feel free to send them through to us in the licenses@esc.vic.gov.au email address, or please include these in your submissions on the Powercor application and we will review them at that time. We hope this session was helpful. I'm just seeing a new post come up.
A new post, so I'll go for that one. What rights weight is given to license during other planning approval processes?
This potentially is a question that's probably better for the other agencies and bodies that are part of those processes. However, we know that, as we mentioned in the presentation, we are part of the regulatory framework in granting a transmission licence. So on that note, yeah, again, please send through any further questions. This presentation will be up ready for review if you would like to rewatch it. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing and we welcome all submissions by the 11th of June. Thank you very much.